So Deuteronomy, and this is when we'll talk about covenant, because there's a covenant structure to Deuteronomy, which has the normal elements of covenant. And it's a really fascinating study. Scholars who have done this kind of research, they actually can nail down the covenants from different time periods, and they say that the biblical covenant structure is much more closer to the Hittite covenant structure than it is subsequently, because most ancient cultures had that covenant structure, and based on how it's structured, they can actually tell you what time frame it came from. So there's evidence that the Bible is written, or at least Deuteronomy is closer to the Hittite covenant structure than it was perhaps the Syrian, which is a fascinating thing. So here we see a normal structure of preamble, historical prologue, stipulations, statement concerning the document itself, witnesses, and then covenant curses and blessings. And that's how Deuteronomy is structured, the whole book. Now, what is a covenant? It's a simply put as a relational partnership. And there's, broadly speaking, two key types, which is very important for us to understand when we read the Bible. One is the royal grant, which is a unilateral covenant. And you'll see that in Genesis 15, for example, where it's a unilateral covenant that one party says will do, and they are responsible for the covenant and its terms and its consequences. So in Genesis 15, for example, God is unilaterally making a covenant, and that covenant is really vital because that's the faithfulness of God to His promise, and that's not dependent on human response. And then there is this what's called a suzerain vassal type treaty, where the suzerain is like the emperor and the vassal is like the little smaller king, and in that it's a conditional covenant. So they both make promises and they both have to keep the end of the bargain, and if they don't, they'll experience consequences. And that is what Deuteronomy is. That's where you have the blessings and curses. That it's part of the covenant structure. So why is this important? Is when you read the word curse in the Bible, just again read the context and so on, but you pretty much can locate it within a covenant structure. So it's not curse because God hates you, or God doesn't like you, or He's mean, or He's like swearing at you, you know. It's curse within a covenant structure. And same with blessing within a covenant structure. And so the prominent demand was exclusive allegiance to the vassal. And that's where the word jealous comes. It is exclusivity, that I am yours, you are mine. And we are in covenant, and you cannot go around violating this without consequence. Now, you know, we don't have that kind of language, covenant language, but we have contracts, you know, and there's stipulations. You'll have to pay penalties. You know, if you ever get a data contract or something, you have a 2-year contract. If you want to cancel it, you have to maybe pay a fee or whatever it is. So we also have contracts that has consequences or in violation of the contract. And it's kind of the same. The difference is that the covenant is more relational. We don't have a relationship with Vodacom unless you're very odd, you know, and you know the director of Vodacom. Maybe I shouldn't say odd, because perhaps you have a person who owns Vodacom, and then that's fine. But otherwise, we don't have relationship with people we get into contract with. But in ancient Near East, contract or covenant meant relationship. They were relational. And so Israel in covenant relationship with Yahweh, and Yahweh in covenant relationship with Israel. And we have to read the law within the covenant context. Again, law is both instruction, command, and a narrative. So when we read the law in today's day and age, we use the word legalistic. Oh, they were just legalistic, but we're grace-based. That's just not true. That's not how it works. They were also grace-based as much as we also have to obey God's word. It's a highly oversimplified and incorrect. It's an incorrect classification The challenge is, I can say that to you because it's like preaching to the choir, but it's hard when someone comes with you and say, oh, legalism, and you can't just say you're wrong, because then they'll be like, aha, see, you are legalistic. Then you have to like work through that, and it's quite frustrating. Because it's a category mistake. When we read law and we go, there you are, legalistic, you're just not reading it correctly. You're wrong, I'm sorry to say. And so it's within the covenant context. And so again, Exodus 16, for example, verse 34, as the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. They understood what they were doing. We just don't. And even in Galatians, when you see law, think Torah, think both narrative and instruction. And there's a really good chance Paul is probably thinking more of the narrative. Genesis to Deuteronomy, the story, how it finds its fulfillment in the Messiah, King Jesus. Exodus 25, verse 16, they put the ark, then put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law, which I will give you. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest sprinkled blood on the mercy seat, which is the ark's cover, in keeping with dealing with the sins of the people. Covenant violation. Again, these are not just arbitrary, crazy, they're not insane people. They're doing it because they know what that means. That, okay, we violated the covenant, we need to now make restitution. That's part of the covenant dynamic. And it's either me or the goat. Well, the goat has to go. But it's covenant violations that's been addressed. And again, it's interesting for us to think about Jesus on the cross. And in Deuteronomy 3, Paul talks about the curse on Jesus. How much of the cross was covenant punishment Jesus took, both for Israel and the world. So there's so many underlining kind of things that you can consider. But there is a covenant violation, there has to be covenant consequence. Here's a great perspective of the law. Leviticus 18 verse 5, keep my decrees and law, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. Law is not punitive or arbitrary. Law operated within the covenant context so it might go well for you. And I'll get to the 10 Commandments, I think it's further down. But let's look at Deuteronomy 4:40. Keep his decrees and commands which I'm giving you, so it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you all for all time. It's beneficial for you. And I'll get to why in just a second. Deuteronomy 6 verse 1 to 5, I won't read that. But Deuteronomy 30 verse 15, see, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience, to keep his commands, decrees and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you're entering to possess. So law is not punitive, it's meant to give you life. The instructions of the Lord is a blessing, not a curse. So I wanted to put this before you. Why is the law good? Why is it life? Why is it beneficial? Well, think in terms of community formation. So imagine if there's a community, which unfortunately we don't have to stretch our imagination. We live in at times very violent societies, including here. If murder was just the norm of the day, you step out of the house, you get killed. What kind of society would that be? Not a good one. It'd be an unhealthy one. What if the neighborhood, you coveted each other's things and wives and husbands? I wouldn't want to live there, for sure. And so community formation is a big part of grasping the basis of law, instruction. To read the 10 Commandments from a community formation perspective. And immediately it just opens up. Wow, this is healthy community. This is image-bearing community. The opposite is violence, coveting, stealing, murder, rape. It's idolatry. That's not healthy community. It's a dysfunctional community, and eventually it's a failed state. So that's why the law was given to God's people, is so they can live as God's people and form a community that is loving, that's compassionate, that's just, and that takes care of the marginalized, and is not careening into chaos. Again, remember, creation in the ancient world is chaos to order, and order is a wise rule. Back to image bearing. So hopefully this makes sense. So it's again, we have to be very careful in unpacking this, because we think of law as traffic laws, or and punishment when you speed and so on and so forth. Or we can even think of law as in going to church or reading the Bible, like, oh, don't get me under the law. I'm free in Christ. I don't need to read my Bible. Well, that's not what the law means. Law is actually about formation, healthy formation. It's not about unhealthy. So hopefully that helps. So I'm going to skip over this, but I wanted to mention this. Now look, you can do your own research and confirm if this is true. I just did a rudimentary search. The words remember in Deuteronomy, remember, listen, hear, is often repeated in Deuteronomy. And it's quite fascinating and exciting when you read through it. How many times God says, like Deuteronomy 8:2, remember how the Lord led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep His commands. Again, remembering the journey of Exodus. Remember this and never forget how you aroused God's anger in the wilderness from the day you left Egypt until you arrived here. You've been rebellious against the Lord. So again, Moses is reminding the second generation what the first generation did, so they don't do the same. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. Deuteronomy 15:15. You can do a word search yourself. Here, I love that word search. Now, Israel, hear the decrees and the laws I'm about to teach you. Follow them, so you may live and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. Again, hear. This is good for you. We'll get to Deuteronomy 6, because that's the famous Shema. If you've heard of Shema Israel, Deuteronomy 6 verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children may, after them, may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all His decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. And hear, Israel. Shema, Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord with your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. It's a famous prayer of the Jews. They still pray this today. Shema Israel. So in closing, and I won't read through all of this, the closing of Deuteronomy is the death of Moses. And the cool part is, let me just see if how God buries him. Did you? I didn't know that till I was preparing for it. Isn't that cool? God buries Moses, which I thought was awesome. And then I'll go into Joshua just a second, because it carries on after the death of Moses. And that's where the next part of the story continues. The Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. And that's really the Torah. How from Genesis to Deuteronomy tells this consistent story. And then Joshua is the second generation ready to take the promised land.